Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Kelly Smith. I'm on the Backup and Recovery Product Management team. Thank you for joining us for the AskTOM March 2020 Office Hours. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity and how the Zero Data Loss Recovery Appliance plays into that architecture. As always, if you have questions along the way, please use the Q&A and then and we'll answer questions as we go. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end to answer other questions that may arise. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hope you find the content valuable. Okay, so there's a safe harbor statement here just in case we get into discussions around things that are not currently shipping with Oracle and we start talking about future roadmaps. But there's nothing in the presentation at the moment that is necessary for safe harbor. Okay, so the first question, of course, is why should you care about cybersecurity for the Oracle database? And I think one of the obvious reasons that this is starting to become more and more of a question from customers is because malware, ransomware, cyber attacks in general are increasing. Information in this day and age is very valuable. There are a lot of people that are reselling that information. So the more information that they can gather, the more data they can gather, provides them more money. So they are continually increasing attacks to try to gain access to that information, that business data that you have in your infrastructure. And the Oracle databases themselves are the mission critical components in most businesses that holds all the valuable customer information. Outages of that are very costly, and costly in two different ways. It's costly from a monetary perspective. It is also costly from a reputation, and the last thing you want your customers to see is your company with exposure from a cyber attack in a viral social media incident. So that is becoming, a very sensitive area, and having an answer around cybersecurity is going to help you, right? Because ultimately, your C-level and boards are going to start demanding action plans. They don't want to be, exposed in a very negative light to their entire customer base or to all of social media. So they want action plans to determine how, as IT professionals, we're going to deal with these ever-increasing attacks in our infrastructures. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the recovery appliance and some of the key features, and then that will lead us into how that helps in cybersecurity environments. So the first thing, the recovery appliance is capable of backing up Oracle database 11G to 19C on any platform, TDE and non-TDE databases. Doesn't matter. Those do not impact any of the functionality that I'm going to be talking about from a recovery appliance perspective, because the recovery appliance understands how to interpret TDE databases and still provide all this rich functionality that's going to help you both in a cyber environment and your typical environment. Transactional block changes are always captured from the databases into the recovery appliance. So that means every transaction that occurs in the database is immediately sent to the recovery appliance for protection. You're not waiting for backup jobs to kick off to get protection. So there aren't big gaps in database protection. The recovery appliance also works in an incremental forever paradigm, meaning that you do not need to do full backups anymore. Once you complete your first full backup, the recovery appliance is then just going to constantly grab changes from the protected databases. Those changes will be stored in the recovery appliance. So at any moment an attack occurs, you've got the latest backup sitting in the recovery appliance, ready to go. When the recovery appliance receives the data, it of course is building virtual full backups and doing all the maintenance activity that is necessary to ensure that the recovery window that is necessary that you've specified is being met. So all the pieces are gathered to protect the database for, let's say, 30 days. So you specified the 30 days. The recovery appliance does all the work to make sure that all the pieces are valid to do recovery for that 30-day window. The recovery appliance is also automatically doing all the cleanup. Traditionally, our man needs to connect back to the database to determine which pieces are still valid and need to be kept around to do recovery. That's not necessary in the recovery appliance environment. The recovery appliance is doing all those checks, all the expiration internally without having to reach back to the production database to do that work. Then from there, the recovery appliance can send data off to cloud storage. It can send data off to a remote replica. It can send data off to tape. All this happens with recovery validation that's end-to-end. So as I mentioned, data that comes into the recovery appliance, validated, we make sure that your protection window is covered. Data that goes out of the recovery appliance is validated. It can be sent to the cloud, of course. When it lands on a downstream or replica recovery appliance, that data is checked all over again. So it goes through the same process. It goes through a validation check. It lives in its own life cycle that is disconnected from this recovery appliance. So this recovery appliance can have a different retention level than this recovery appliance. So you can set retention at each level, the recovery appliance level, at the cloud, in tape. All those are independent retentions that you configure that are controlled independently from each other. And then finally, all that data rolls up into Enterprise Manager. So you have a rich monitoring infrastructure that also does reporting, it does audits. There's all kinds of stuff that we can do with Enterprise Manager to make sure that you are aware of everything that is occurring in the environment and can react to any changes. So now if we put our cybersecurity hat on and we go back through this architecture and look at the features and functionality that are available in each stage, if you've always got backups coming into the recovery appliance, that means you're always ready for your secure location to open. And I'll talk about the concept around this vault in just a moment. The vault is the concept of storing data in a remote location, being out here. So, and you want this to be slightly disconnected from production to make sure that it's secure from a cyber attack. So with this recovery appliance, anytime the vault is ready to open, your production recovery appliance has the latest backup. So that means you don't have to do interesting schedule coordination because the destination into the vault, that destination should open at a somewhat random pattern, because you don't want the vault to open every day at 2 o'clock, for example, because then if you have an intrusion in your primary data center, they can see this vault opens, or this external storage opens every day at 2, and they can just wait for 2 o'clock to occur, and then they know they have an opening. If it's randomized, it's a little more difficult to predict when that opening is going to happen. So that means that you need to have your backup ready to be shipped as soon as the vault opens. Next is the incremental forever. So whether the database is TDE or non-TDE, the recovery appliance is going to be using an incremental forever paradigm to protect data. So that means you're going to be moving the smallest amount of data possible to protect your Oracle databases, which is going to limit the amount of time that's necessary to have the vault open. So that's limiting exposure, right? The vault should be disconnected as much as possible. And now we're limiting that opening to the smallest window possible, because we're only moving the transactions and the block changes that have occurred in the database since the last vault opening. Next, validation and retention is all managed internally by the recovery appliance. So there's no need to reconnect to the Oracle database. So that means that each one of these recovery appliances do not have to connect back to their source database to figure out how long data needs to be kept and which components that you've backed up, which backup pieces need to be kept around to do your recovery. That all happens internally. So the recovery appliances can effectively work in a disconnected mode because of their design. As I mentioned, EM is going to give you policy management, auditing, reporting, and all that can be automated. There's a scheduling system inside Enterprise Manager that sends out backup reports, sends out protection reports, sends out audit reports so that you can get a rich understanding of what is happening in your environment and any changes that you may that will be flagged in auditing that should not have been made. And then finally, separated and isolated access. So each recovery appliance can have separate access accounts. They can have separate retention. They do separate validation, and they can be audited separately. And I'll get into how that works in just a few moments. Okay, so let's move on and look at an architecture with a vault configuration. So you've got your primary data center, which you've always had. And with primary data centers, some people have DR data centers. So you'll see you've got data guard replication. You've got non-data guard replication that can occur at the recovery appliance. So you've traditionally had this protection across both primary and DR sites with multiple data centers. The database itself doing replication here and being protected locally by the recovery appliance. Non-replicated or non-data guard databases backing up to the recovery appliances and being replicated. So this left-hand side is all just typical configurations that have been around for a long time. You've got Enterprise Manager managing this environment from a database perspective, from a recovery appliance perspective on both sides. Now, introduction of the vault. Remember I talked about a timed opening. So you've got a gateway that opens at a random time and receives data from the production recovery appliance. This vault opening, as I mentioned, should be at a random time so no one can predict it from inside the data center. And it should be triggered from inside the vault. So the vault itself should be controlling when this opens. You don't want a situation where a bad actor or someone who has intruded your production data center to have access to open this gateway. The gateway should be opened inside the vault, and then that allows replication to flow out of the vault or out of production and into the vault. Notice that we have a separate Enterprise Manager in the vault. So now this Enterprise Manager is monitoring the vault specifically and is separate from the Enterprise Manager that runs in production. So this Enterprise Manager doesn't know about anything that is present in the production data center. This production Enterprise Manager doesn't know anything about what's happening in the vault. They're separate entities. They're kept separate. They're managed separately. Different accounts, different access. And in the vault perspective, that management connection should not even be opened. It should also be on a service request access, and when the request comes in, the vault should be opened. From a management perspective, work done either on the Enterprise Manager itself or on the recovery appliance, and then immediately after that work is finished, the vault should be closed. The person who controls the vault opening and closing should not have access to any of the components in the vault, so they have a specialized account and role just to open the access to the vault. That way, at no point do you have just random management access into the vault. You want to keep this vault as secure as possible. So let's step forward and start looking at each one of these components and concepts independently here. So first, you have separation of duty. And that's probably the most important thing when you're trying to separate for security reasons, right? I'm referring to these as zones. So zone 1, you have your DBAs working. DBAs always work on the database. DBAs should not be able to make changes on your recovery appliance. Zone 2 is the recovery appliance administrators. They should not be able to make changes on the database. So you've got a separation of duty that has existed for a long time in the primary data center. And for the vault, you're just adding another zone. This zone is for vault administrators. These accounts don't have access to anything in zone 1 and zone 2. The zone 1 and zone 2 accounts don't have anything to access in zone 3. So 3 separate silos of separation from an account perspective. No single account can get across all 3 pillars. From the replication perspective, as I mentioned, real-time protection is happening for the databases into this first recovery appliance. That means this vault that's on a random schedule, whenever it happens to open, the replication can occur from production into the vault while the gateway is open. The gateway is closed, validation, expiration, all the time-based policies that you have set inside the vault operate independently of production, independently of the databases, so they run on their own. The vault is self-contained at this point. It's doing expirations, it's doing cross-checks, it's doing backup validation, it's ensuring that your protection window is being maintained. All that's reported through this enterprise manager. This enterprise manager then can send reports out in a one-way direction from the vault. So vault change control, as I mentioned before, the management network should not have a connection that is persistent. If a change is required inside the vault, a gateway administrator for the management network should open that gateway and open access into the vault. The RA or enterprise manager admin would make any changes necessary. The gateway would then be closed to the management network, and auditing would be run to ensure that the changes that were made were matched the service request that was established. And there are lots of different auditing that can take place inside the vault. You want to look for any kind of APIs that were run. You want to monitor your protection policies, your protected databases, the RA versions, the enterprise manager versions, any user accounts, all that stuff can be audited. Okay, next, from a compliance reporting perspective, as I mentioned earlier, there's an enterprise manager that runs independently in both production and the vault. And those show all the events that have occurred in the environment. Every API change both on production and on the vault can be monitored and reported on. The database recoverability in production and in the vault can be monitored. All the system activities, any kind of alerts, obviously would come into the enterprise manager and be sent out. One of the common and popular ways to do this, of course, is an SMTP. With SMTP traffic, that is one direction. So both of these enterprise managers would send SMTP to be distributed in email, and then based on those reports and active alerts, the action can be taken from there. Next, we have layers of detection. So obviously, it does not move without being checked from left to right. So data that is being captured by RMAN is validated by RMAN as it's leaving the database itself. It moves into the recovery appliance. The recovery appliance then does another level of checks to ensure that the database backup pieces are actually valid, that they represent the backup window that is necessary for you to do recovery. Basically, that you have a complete backup. Everything that is captured represents the backup that is necessary to recover the database. And then as data leaves this recovery appliance and goes into the vault, it's checked on exit. So as soon as this recovery appliance starts moving data, it's checking the data as it leaves. And then upon arrival in this vault recovery appliance, the database's backup integrity is checked all over again. So we don't want to blindly just receive data into the vault. We want that vault data to be validated so that you can ensure that if you ever have to fall back to the vault, that the data in the vault is actually recoverable. Okay, next, at time of recovery, if something suspect has happened in the primary data center, you're going to have to go back. You could possibly have to go back into the vault to retrieve a backup. The recovery appliance is architected in such a way that you can be very specific on your access to the vault. So you do not have to open up this recovery appliance and expose all the backups that are on this recovery appliance. You simply determine the account that the DBA is going to use to retrieve data from the recovery appliance. You give that specific account access to the specific backups for the specific database that is going to be recovered. So you say, okay, this DBA has access to the backups that exist for this database. And that is all that DBA has access to. So they can simply, from a very specific backup perspective, retrieve the pieces they need from the vault. And that means that none of the other backups and the vault get exposed at all. So that retrieval is done back to another Oracle database. It can go back to the source. It can go to an alternate location, wherever the DBA wants to send it. Once that operation is complete, then the recovery appliance administrator can remove that access, and then the gateway can be closed for management. And also, something else that you could think about in this particular method is you'll probably want to have another piped network somewhere, because this particular network that's being used for replication and this network that's being used for management should not be an open-ended network. It should be a network for replication. It should be a point-to-point network that goes from the recovery appliance in production to the recovery appliance in the vault. You don't want, full access for this network to be exposed outside of just this path. And same thing for the management network, right? You don't want this management network to just be open to anything that's in the data center. You want to keep it isolated. So for recovery purposes, you may want another network that is isolated for just recovery, that either goes back to production, or maybe it goes into another isolated area where you'll do recovery of the database and then some inspection before the data is moved back into the primary data center. So again, options for you to determine how you want to manage the data flow when it's time to do some kind of cyber recovery, cyber attack recovery. But the idea is you don't want to overexpose the vault if you're trying to recover from an incident. You want to make sure that the vault, access to the vault is limited to just the person who needs access to just the database backups that need access. So kind of just to wrap it all up, in this environment, in this architecture, databases are always protected in real time. So that means that anytime the database backups need to be replicated, they're ready to go, they go straight to the vault. That of course, limits your vault access. The backups are also independently validated. They're validated when they leave the database. They validate when they arrive at the first recovery appliance in production. They are validated again when they land on the vault. They are expired independently. There's no need, if your primary production recovery appliance is holding data for 60 days, there's no need to hold 60 days in the vault. You could hold 7 days in the vault, or 10 days in the vault, 3 days in the vault. That's whatever your compliance requirements are from a vault perspective, you can set that, and it's managed independently and will be expired independently with each recovery appliance. TDE, when we're talking about, securing an environment, TDE is almost like a co-requisite. If you're thinking about the cyber, how to protect yourself from cyber attacks, TDE should also be in your mind, right? How do you encrypt the data that is sitting on your production databases? So that encryption has no impact on the recovery appliance's operations. You still get incremental forever. You still get real-time protection. You still get the ability to validate. You still get the ability to independently expire. None of that changes. So think, if you're thinking about cybersecurity, TDE should also be, like one of those co-requisite things that should be on your mind. And then with Enterprise Manager as, a component that is, that comes along as, helpful for a recovery appliance environment. We always recommend that you have Enterprise Manager manage the environment. Having 2 separate Enterprise Manager instances to show in real time and with scheduled reports the recoverability of all your databases and any kind of auditing, both in the vault and in production. Access control being siloed per area so that no single account can access everything. That's going to help you as you plan out your security measures. And then access to the vault itself from a management perspective, requiring 2 different authoritative accounts, one to open the management gateway, the other to do work. The two should not have rights to do both. And then finally, the vault, when it's time to have to do some kind of recovery in the infrastructure, having the vault access restricted down to the backups for a single database. So you don't have to overexpose the vault if you're trying to fight a security intrusion. Okay, so that was a lot of information to cover. Could have been some new information that some of you have never seen before that you did think on a little bit. But now's the time to ask any questions and to determine, and let's just see if there are any questions out there. Okay, there are no questions. How about a quick survey? If participants raise their hands or reply to us in chat or on the Q&A if you have any cybersecurity initiatives started for your databases, or if you're planning any or presently evaluating any. We have one person saying no. Anyone else? Okay, so this is something you should start thinking about, especially before it becomes a requirement that shows up in your environment. And also, those requirements, because this is such a critical occurrence, when it does occur, there's probably going to be a short timeline to come up with something that's interesting to satisfy both the C-level and the boards who are asking for a plan to remedy this. So definitely something you should think about or start thinking about if you haven't already. How are you going to tell upper management and the board of your organizations how you're going to combat these cyber attacks?
Yeah, Kelly, this is Tim. So we talk with customers about compliance and regulations that apply to any kind of data integrity and protection, characteristics. So cyber recovery and cybersecurity is just one aspect of that can affect your data, right? Whatever you keep at your site. So feedback on your regulations or compliance that you generally have to adhere to. In the case of cybersecurity, those should also apply as well. So we're also interested in any feedback on particular regulations or compliance that you need to keep, for your backup strategies.
So there's a question that came into chat about redundancy for recovery backups. It's talking about using the archive service, which, as pointed out here, is very affordable. So I want to make a distinction between archiving backups and being ready in the case, in this particular case where we're talking about on-premises preparedness for cyber attacks. So the archive service is designed for long-term retention and primarily around compliance, right? In this particular case, all this data that is on premises is there to be quickly accessible. You're not having to wait for data to be returned from the cloud. With the archive service, you could also tape into that. Those are typically processes that take, many, many hours, sometimes days to get data back on site. In this particular case, all your data is staying on site. This recovery of vault, this RA in the vault is actually in your data center on high-speed networks and can be retrieved very quickly. So that limits your business interruption. So it's just think about that in two different ways. There's the way to archive data that if you have to get to it and it takes a day to get to it, okay, no big deal. In this particular case, we're talking about high-speed access in the event that an event has occurred. Okay, is there anything else? Anyone else, any other comments, any other questions, anything anybody wants to cover? Okay, well, we thank you for your time today. If questions come up later, you can always ask them at the AskTOM Office Hours site. There's a way to submit questions there. If you want to see other topics covered during our AskTOM Office Hours, there's also, you can also submit those on AskTOM. We're always looking for interesting topics that would be interesting to you. So submit your request there. This recording will also be placed on AskTOM Office Hours, so you can reference it later, and you'll see the past recordings that we've done in AskTOM. So if there are no other questions, we'll close off the session for today. We really appreciate you joining us and hope to see you in future sessions. Thank you so much.